Welcome back guys, Danny Stone here for another tutorial video, this time for the long awaited military guide. Hopefully this guide will familiarise you with the art of war. This is quite a complicated topic, so I'll try to keep things as simple as I possibly can, and this guide should help you master the basics of warfare and give you probably a slight edge in battle. This guide has been incredibly difficult to make, and it took me really ages to actually do it, and there's like so much stuff to talk about. So I hope my efforts were not in vain, and I hope it actually helps you guys without being overly complicated. Battles in Imperator Rome are carried out on land by the army and at sea by the navy. In this video I will only focus on the army and not the navy. I will do a separate video for war at sea, because otherwise I think the video will take way too long to actually treat both subjects at once. Anyway, let's get on to business. Your armies are a group of cohorts, one cohort making up 1,000 men. For example, if I was to select the first legion up here, and you will be able to see that it's made up of 18 cohorts, therefore a total of 18,000 soldiers. Here you can see that it is comprised of 6 cohorts of heavy cavalry, 6 cohorts of heavy infantry, and 6 cohorts of light cavalry. I forgot to mention that here you don't see a total of 18,000 troops because I'm actually in a war against Etruria and I've lost some men in battle. But if this first legion was up to the maximum amount of soldiers, it would be 18,000. You can recruit units by either using the macro builder or add to existing armies. The macro builder is located in the top left of the screen, just click on it and go into the recruit cohort section. Here you'll be able to recruit any type of unit you want available, providing you have the resource to recruit them. You can also recruit the units by clicking on your army and clicking on the Add to Army button over here down on the bottom left next to the portrait. Here then you'll be able to build any units available to build, and they will automatically add themselves to that army you've selected to build them to. As you guys already probably know, there are multiple types of units in the game, each with different advantages and weaknesses against the other unit types. For example, if I were to go to the macro builder here and just scroll my mouse over a specific unit type, let's say the archers for example, it will open up their weaknesses and their advantages. Here you can see for the archers they do extra damage against heavy infantry, so plus 10% damage to that type of unit, and they also do extra damage to light infantry by a degree of plus 25%. It also shows their negative actions against other types of troops, so they receive more damage, or they do less damage, sorry, to heavy cavalry by 10%, also light cavalry by 10%. I won't go over every single unit type and all their advantages and weaknesses. I will let you guys spend the time scrolling over it and look which ones do more damage to which troop and less damage to another troop. Please note that some units require certain resources to produce. To produce cavalry, you need horses. To produce heavy infantry, you need iron, war elephants, and so forth. The only units that do not require a specific resource to produce are archers and light infantry. Anyway, with all these units available to us, well, which one should we produce? And what should be the army compositions? This is a really hard question, which is extremely difficult to answer, and it's a subject that I've not totally mastered yet. However, based on many hours of playing the game, I've found a system that works for me. It is by no means the ideal and universal right way to do things, or the very best, it's just my personal preference that I find does the job correctly. If you guys have any army composition suggestions, please, I would love to hear them in the comments. Just pop them down below and tell me how you like to organise your armies. Also, feel free to experiment with army compositions. It is the best way to learn which composition suits you. Anyway, my personal preference is as followed. I like to have 2 types of armies. Heavy armies that do most of the major fighting between other units, and light armies that support the heavy troops, chase down smaller stacks of enemies that kind of try to infiltrate behind my lines, and siege down forts. The heavy shock armies that I like to make are made up of heavy cavalry, heavy infantry, and light cavalry. This is the same example here with my first legion. As you can see, I have heavy cavalry, heavy infantry, and light cavalry. When your troops are engaged in battle, There are 3 lines. You have the first line, which is called the primary cohort, which is the first one to engage the enemy. Then once they've engaged, it goes over to the secondary cohorts, which then engage the enemy troops. They're in the second row, and then they move to the first and engage after the primary cohorts have either fled or destroyed. So if my primary cohort got destroyed, then it would be the secondary cohort that takes over. If the enemy's primary cohort got destroyed, then my secondary cohort will take over, attacking them. And then finally you have your flanking units, which deal damage on the side. As you can see here, the heavy cavalry are my primary cohorts. They engage the enemy first. I like putting them first because the AI likes to put archers as his primary cohort, and heavy cavalry deal a massive 50% damage bonus to archers. If I just move my mouse cursor over the heavy cav here, you'll see that damage v archers is increased by 50%. I mean, that is massive. Next come the shock troops, which is my heavy infantry, which are the second cohorts, the second line. They're heavy infantry that engage the enemy once the archers have been finished. I like putting the heavy infantry there as secondary cohorts because they deal a nice 20% damage bonus to light infantry, and considering that iron is pretty scarce and not everybody has access to it, the AI does like to put a lot of light infantry as their secondary cohort. And these heavy infantry do a pretty big, I think it's 20% damage, there we go, to light infantry. And even if the enemy did have heavy infantry, they'll just cancel each other out, so there wouldn't be any positive or negative bonus to that. And finally, as flanking troops, I use light cavalry because of their high maneuver ratio. So they have a high maneuver of 3. If I move my mouse cursor over it, you see their maneuver is 3. That basically means that they can hit more men or hit more enemy troops on the flanks and pretty much do more damage. That's a very simplistic analysis of that, but that is pretty much what it means. For this composition that I've got here, you do really need to get iron and horses quickly in a game, so if you don't have it, make sure you conquer somebody that does, or make sure you import it quickly, because honestly, heavy infantry and cav, they just give you a major bonus. Especially heavy infantry, I find that they do a serious amount of damage. But also remember that no matter what the composition here, make sure you set your primary, secondary and flanking cohorts to the ones that correspond in your armies here. If I were to put light infantry as my primary, then I'll put archers as my secondary and heavy infantry as my third, you see it wouldn't correspond. I have no light infantry and I have no archers in there, so basically I'm just wasting this little neat technique here. So make sure you actually set them to the right type of units that you want. As I said, there's no universal way to do this. Please feel free to experiment with what you've got. Honestly, just try out different compositions, different tactics, and see which ones actually work. Now we move on to the light armies that I use for sweeping up small stacks of enemy troops and sieging down forts. They are also used to support my heavy troops if they are outnumbered in battle. I generally use a composition of archers for my primary cohorts, followed by light infantry for the secondary cohorts, and then some light cav on the flanks. Their low army weight makes them ideal for sieging forts, meaning they can withstand low supply limit territories. To see the weight of an army, just move the mouse cursor over the attrition icon over here in the army interface, and you'll see the unit weight of the army and the supply limit of the actual territory it is in. I also tend to use small light armies, so about 15 odd cohorts, maybe 10 to 15 cohorts, something like that, as regional governor armies designed to keep the peace, pretty much, and lower any unrest in a particular region. They can also be used to crush any slave revolts or barbarian intruders in a specific region. To do this, all you need to do is basically get your light army. So I'm going to select the legion here, this light army here. And all I would need to do is pretty much move it into one of my regions. So if I move it to my capital region over here, which is Italia, and once they've arrived there, you should be able to click on this little button here. It's called Assign to Region. And what happens is the army will then be commanded by the governor. So the governor of this province here is Publius Sempronius Sophus. That army would be assigned to him. And what would happen is it would lower the unrest over here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly move these guys over here and show you what it does. So these are going to be moving. Quickly speed it up to 5 speed. So they should quickly move. Let's just get that. Who cares? I don't really give a damn. Move out the way. It's just for tutorial purposes here. So I'm going to move this guy over into the region. I'll just move him here because it's the shortest place. Okay, so now he's arrived, all we need to do is click on Assign to Region, and as you can see that Publius Sempronius Sophus is the governor, and if I click in any territory in the region here, you'll see that the unrest has lowered. It was 1.3 something, and now it's gone down to 0.44, and you can see at the top here, just move a mouse cursor over the unrest here, and it will say Governor's Local Troops minus 0.81. So this is kind of useful if you want to keep the peace in regions, notably in regions that you've just conquered who have high unrest. Just assign a governor army there consisting of light men, and he'll basically control the place. What you need to remember is, though, since it is assigned to the governor, the troops will become loyal to the governor over time, which is why I tend to use light troops, because they're less quality than the heavy troops. I don't want the heavy troops becoming loyal to a governor, because if the governor becomes disloyal, then obviously he can use them troops to attack me. I'll sooner he have the less competent, in brackets, light armies than the heavy armies. How big must I make each army, might you ask? Well, that all depends on the supply limit. Check the supply limit of each territory and build your army size accordingly. At the start of the game, I like to build something like 15,000 strong armies because it keeps well in the supply limit of the game, generally speaking. If your army weighs more than the supply limit of a territory, you lose troops to attrition, thus reducing your manpower. You need to replace the troops you lost, and to replace them, you take it out of your manpower pool. To see the supply limit of a territory, just click on any specific territory you want to see the supply limit of. For example, I'll go into Vey here, and move your mouse cursor over the bowl here, and you'll see that this goes through the supply limit. So this territory here, or this territory of Vey, can maintain an army with a maximum weight of 56.92. If I were to click on any army here, like this Light Legion for example, and move over the attrition icon, it will show you the weight of this army, which is 8.59, and it falls well in the supply limit of 56.92. Considering that cities concentrate pops and thus have a higher supply limit, but there's not many of them, which is why I like to keep it down to 15k. If I go to the territories, for example, like here, this is a territory in Tarcuna, the supply limit is only 20. If I went to here, the settlement of Carcioli and Latium, the supply limit is only 18.52. And of course, you're moving your armies, when you're moving them into different places for war, they're going through these territories, and if these territories cannot, take the actual weight of your army, you'll lose men, which is why the 15,000 at the start of the game, I find, is ideal. The longer the game goes on, the better the supply limit will get thanks to inventions. You can have inventions that increase the supply limit, and a general increase in pops due to growth, migration or capture in wars. The amount of pops in a territory is determined by your pops, and also as the game goes on your civilization level will increase, and the civilization level also increases the supply limit. Remember, heavy troops like heavy infantry weigh more than light infantry, so take this into account when stationing troops in a territory. To see this, all I need to do is go to the military tab here, and I go into the cohorts, and if I go down to Principage, which is my heavy infantry, you'll see there's a score with plus 50%. Well, this is a heavy infantry, which means the attrition weight is 50% more. This is why you need to be careful when you have heavy troops and heavy armies, because they weigh a lot more than the average light army. It's important to understand that these army compositions that I've done do not by any means guarantee that you'll win the war. It might just give you a slight edge in a very close battle, but the army composition is entirely down to you. It's entirely down to what you want, what you feel like, and just don't hesitate to experiment. The main factors that will actually help you win the wars are numbers, so the amount of soldiers you have. Generally, if you have more men than the guy you're fighting, the bigger the odds of victory. The martial stat of your general is also critically important, and tech, and we'll go through all these right now. First of all, one of the most important things to help you win is to make sure that you are ahead of your enemies in military tech. For each military tech level you have, your armies gain 0.10 morale. If you race way ahead of your rivals, you can easily gain a significant morale advantage in battle by smashing the will to fight of an army that has more men than you. Remember, the more morale you have, the longer your troops can stay in battle and the longer they are willing to fight. To see how much morale extra you gain due to military tech, just right click on your nation, and up here in the martial advances it will show you the number of levels you've got. Per level you get 0.10, so if I was at 8 levels of martial tech I'll get an extra 0.8 morale. You can also see what the enemy has, how much martial level he has by right clicking on his nation, and you can also see how much martial advances he have and therefore how much extra morale he has. Unlocking military advances can also grant you access to some really neat inventions which you'll be able to see in the inventions tab. So each level you get, you'll access another set of military tech, and it can be really very useful. They can actually be used to increase your soldiers' discipline. To see your discipline, open the military tab and go to the cohort section. So open this military tab here, go to the cohort section, and then scroll your mouse cursor over the discipline here and it will show you the amount of discipline. The higher your discipline, the more damage you do to enemy soldiers and the less damage you receive in return. So having a really high discipline can really help turn that tide in battle. Having a surplus of certain trade goods can also increase your soldiers' competence. For example, having a surplus of iron in the capital province increases heavy infantry discipline by 10%. I can see this if I just went down into the same tab, so military cohorts, I go down to the heavy infantry bit and I can see a little plus 10 heavy infantry discipline. This is because I have extra surplus of iron in the capital. If I go onto my capital here, left click on Rome, and you can see I have a surplus of iron. This translates into the military section here by this little plus 10 heavy infantry discipline, which means that my heavy infantry do more damage done to enemy troops in combat and they also receive less damage. Traditions can also give your different unit types certain buffs. All you need to do is go to the Show Tradition section in the Military tab. So here we go, and here's all your available traditions. And for a certain amount of military experience, so for 100 military experience can buy you 1 tradition, you can unlock different buffs. For example, I could unlock Principes, would increase my heavy military offense even further, therefore increasing the damage dealt in combat. If you guys don't know what military experience is or how to get it, just check out my Cicero patch guide I did a while back and I go over that aspect in detail. It's also important when creating your armies to take into account your traditions. So let's say Rome here, for example, as I can see they have a lot of things that help with heavy infantry. So maybe going with a lot of heavy infantry could be the way forward. It's same for any other nations. If another nation prioritises cavalry, then make sure you make a bit of cavalry because of course the military traditions of that particular nation give a bonus to the cavalry. Just to quickly go back to the trade goods and the different bonuses they give soldiers, if you want to check that out, just click on any given territory, import the trade routes, and then you'll see all of the resources. Now, you need to just quickly go into the strategic resources and just hover your mouse cursor over it and it will show you what you get. For example, if I were to have a surplus of horses in the capital, my light cav would gain an extra 10% discipline. If I would have a surplus in the capital, and if I would also export it, then I would gain an extra 5% discipline. The same applies for the elephants. If I had a surplus of war elephants, then my war elephants would gain more discipline, and if I was exporting it, I would also gain even more discipline. So just check this out, check these different buffs you get out from the military resources. Secondly, the martial stat of your general is very important. The higher the martial stat, the better the odds of winning. Here, in my heavy army here, I have the general Publius Cornelius Arvina, and he has 8 martial stat. You can see here. That is okay. It's not crap, but it's not brilliant, but it's a good base. In a very simplistic way, combat in the game is decided by a series of dice rolls from 1 to 6. The higher the martial stat of that general, the better the odds that you have of rolling a better dice number than your opposing general. I have seen brilliant generals win battles when outnumbered 2 to 1, and basically the opposing general just has a really crap martial stat and he's just rolling crap numbers on the die and you just get trounced that way. So don't underestimate the power of a general's martial stat. That would be suicide. Another thing to make sure is that you select the right tactics for your armies. What do I mean by this? Well, just click on any army and at the top right here you'll see a little square with an animal icon, and that is the current tactic employed. Click on it, it will open a list of different tactics. As you can see, there are a number of tactics that are efficient depending on the composition types of your units. As you can see, for the composition that I have, shock action seems to be the most effective with 61% tactic effectiveness, and as you can see it increases by 16% the heavy cavalry effectiveness and 44% heavy infantry effectiveness. Each tactic has 2 tactics which it works well against and 2 tactics which it is negative against. So basically, if I were to choose shock action here and I would come up against someone using the envelopment tactic, then I basically would do 12% more damage against an army using the envelopment tactic. However, if I came up with somebody using the bottleneck tactic, then that army will deal me, well I would deal, sorry, minus 10% damage to their army, so I'll deal less damage. So I'll let you guys fiddle about with this, just check. I normally just choose which one is like the more efficient for my army comp, so if I see one with a higher percentage here of tactic effectiveness, I just go for it. From what I've experienced, the outcome is minor. I don't think it changes things too much. I think it helps in a little way, but I don't think it's overly major. So if I were you guys, I would just take the one with the highest tactic effectiveness depending on the composition of your armies. Finally, the most obvious thing to remember is that numbers mean victory. Generally speaking, the more soldiers you have compared to the dude you're fighting, the bigger the odds of victory. To see how many men your opposing enemy has, just right click on his nation, and here you'll see the number of cohorts he has. Basically see if you have more than him, and if you have more than him, you pretty much have a good chance of winning, so make sure you kind of check that out. Remember to also increase the size of your armies by forming alliances and calling them in to help you during the war. The more allies the better, because the AI will not hesitate to make alliances and call them in a war against you. I also forgot to mention, terrain can also prove a deciding factor. Depending on the terrain you fight can help sway the tide of battle. If the enemy attacks you on a hill, for example, the attacker will get a -1 to his dice roll during the fighting. So if the enemy general rolled a 3, it will be downgraded by 1 to a 2. Mountains give -2 to the dice roll. Just remember that that applies to you if you are the attacker as well, so choose your battles wisely, because if you're attacking somebody on a mountain, then you will get -2 to your dice roll. If you want to plan kind of where you want to fight and see what terrain is what, just click on the terrain, simple terrain map mode here, and just check out what each terrain gives you. For example, the brown is the hill. If I click on it here, move the mouse cursor over the hills, and you'll see attackers get a -1 penalty to their dice roll. Mountains, it's even more severe. If I went here, mountains have been black. If I clicked on that there, and you'll see mountains get -2 penalty to their dice roll. So it's quite significant. So really, choose where you want to fight your battles, because when outnumbered, this can help. Well guys, that's about it for this guide to military matters. I hope it helped. This subject was a really tricky one, and it took a hell of a long time to actually write the script and try and get everything I wanted to get in this video. It is so complex, and even with what all I've done here, I feel like I'm only scratching the surface, and I didn't really dare to make it even longer or go into the really finer details of this, because it can get really tricky. I hope this was enough to actually help you guys out, and if you liked the video, please don't hesitate to hit that like button down below, and also don't hesitate to comment on your favourite army compositions in the comment section below. I would love to hear what your compos are, and what compos you guys make, and why you do it. Anyway, as per usual, thank you so much for joining me, guys, and yeah, I really also wanted to say that I appreciate the support I got from my other tutorial videos. I mean, you guys have been amazing with all the likes, the comments and everything. It's just been brilliant. It's like way more than I suspected, and I feel very humbled by it, and I can't thank you guys enough. Anyway, I will see you guys next time for another episode of Imperator Academy. I'll probably try and make something on the mechanics of republics, notably in the political bit, so I'll give that a try probably. Anyway, later people. Peace out.